This is StoryBeat, Storytellers on Storytelling, an exploration into how master storytellers and artists develop and build brilliant stories and works of art that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators of all kinds find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University in the heart of downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to give us a rating or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. At the age of 8, my guest today, David Wise, created a 12-minute animated film entitled Short Circuit, which was shown worldwide and won numerous awards. Dubbed the world's youngest filmmaker by Variety, he appeared on several national television shows and was written about in Time, Life, The New Yorker, and many other publications. At 19, he sold his first television script, an episode of Star Trek the Animated Series, co-written with Russell Bates. That episode won an Emmy Award for Best Children's Programming, the only Emmy the original Star Trek ever won. Wise subsequently wrote for numerous live-action series, including Wonder Woman and Buck Rogers, and has written for dozens of series, most notably the original Transformers, for which he wrote 15 episodes, including the origin story of Optimus Prime. He-Man, Smurfs, Chippendales Rescue Rangers, Batman the Animated Series, resulting in another Emmy recognition in 1994, and he also wrote for My Little Pony. David is best known for having developed Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for television, creating most of the elements for which the Turtles became famous, including their love of pizzas and the catchphrase, Cowabunga Dude. Wise was showrunner of the original series for most of its 10-year run, during which he wrote over 100 episodes. He's currently writing the animated feature Pet Robots for Blue Dream Studios, whose feature Animal Crackers opens in theaters in the very near future. More important than all of that, I got to spend more than 10 years playing cards once a week at David's home. So for all those reasons and many more, it's truly a great pleasure for me to have my dear friend David Wise on StoryBeat today. David, welcome.
I fold. I was bluffing.
Well, okay, I got the pot. I'm going home.
Yeah, there you go. It's your ticket.
So obviously,
hi.
Hi. So obviously you were what can easily be described as a child prodigy. At what age did you really first go, hey, I like being creative and I'm good at this?
I don't know that I ever went, I'm good at this. But, all kids, I've always said all kids are Picasso. All kids are creative. They're always drawing. They're always making stuff up. They're always playing games. They're always, So, and I think people who go on to have careers in any kind of creative endeavor, and I mean that broadly, just never lose that. So to me, it was kind of a straight continuum from, doing a lot of drawings as a kid and a lot of, painting. I'm not a good artist. It's one of the reasons why I stopped doing animation when I kind of hit like 13 or 14 was that I just was not any kind of a draftsman.
But you were but you started doing art as a young boy.
Well, but all kids do, I started with, my early work, Steve, was in finger paint. Ultimately, I found that medium quite limiting. And so I moved on to poster paint on poster board. No, all kids, paint, and in my opinion, all kids' drawings are good. They're like legitimate works of art, and it's because it's kind of a pure expression. There are no filters yet, or the filters are very mild, or the filters are very specific and very sort of, part of the child's character. So to me, it was kind of a straight line for doing that kind of drawing to discovering how to make flip books. Do you know what a flip book is?
I certainly do.
Should
It's
I
where you have
explain?
many pages.
Should I
Yes,
explain
explain
to
it.
the vast radio audience, podcast audience out there?
Yes, explain
A
flip
flip
books.
book is when you take a notepad and on the very back bottom page in the corner, you make a drawing of like a stick figure, and then you drop one page down and move the stick figure, do another drawing where it's moved a little bit, and you keep doing that all the way until you reach the top page of the notepad, and then you flip the whole thing, sort of twixt thumb and index finger, and the stick figure seems to move. My godfather, who was artist from Spain who lived in America most of his life, named Javier Gonzalez, who painted with Picasso when they were both in their 20s in Spain.
Wow.
Taught me how to make these flip books, how to make drawings move. And I loved cartoons like any kid. And also there was, in the late 50s, on one of the networks, or maybe even in syndication, aired the Woody Woodpecker Show, which was old Woody Woodpecker shorts in a half-hour package. And Walter Lantz, the guy who was the head of Universal's animation, who did the Woody Woodpecker stuff, would do host segments where he would explain how the technical aspects of animation, from doing the line drawings, which are in essence a flip book, and in fact artists will flip through, a stack of their animation drawings like a flip book to check, all the details of the motion and whatnot, to tracing those onto cells, to painting the cells, to putting them under the camera. So at a very young age, thanks to Walter Lantz, I kind of understood how this stuff worked. And my father, who knew a lot of artists, he ran an art gallery in Cleveland at the time.
Mm-hmm.
All these artists were telling him, get this kid a camera. He's got a knack for this. And suddenly I was making my drawings move and doing all sorts of they were experiments. It wasn't storytelling or anything. It was just, that's the thing about animation is it's more acting or like camera work than storytelling, which is why you never let animators be the storytellers. You always have a Walt Disney or somebody who has his eye on or John Lasseter or whatever, who have their eye on the big picture, and can dole out individual assignments to the animators. But at any rate, I did more and more experiments when I was 6, 7, and almost 8. I think I actually finished Short Circuit just before I turned 8. And by finished, I mean just my dad edited it together and said, why don't you make a bunch of sounds, on a tape recorder, and we'll sync, we'll sort of put it over what you've done, and then you'll have a film that you can project. And this is all in 16 millimeter. This is before home video, before Super 8. There was regular 8, but I don't know. I wasn't going to say I had to have 16 millimeter, for gosh sake. No, you couldn't do it with. I tried to do it with regular 8, and there were just like literally technical issues. And the resolution of 8 millimeter film is horrible. So it was just as well. But I mean, obviously, I had a lot of support, both artistically and financially. Not that these really cost any money to make. It was but they did spring for cameras and film processing.
I was going to say you had access to it in those days. That would have been somewhat more expensive than you could do it today.
Well, except our stuff was really cheap. I mean, I had a secondhand Kodak, what they call a Cine camera, which in the 35 millimeter version is actually what Ray Harryhausen used for his non-drawn dimensional animation of all puppets in Seventh Voyage of Sinbad and whatnot. But it's basically a camera that's designed to shoot one frame at a time, not to shoot 24 frames a second continuously.
Right.
But this was used. It probably cost a couple $100. And then I didn't have a real animation stand. What they found was like an old disused X-ray stand that they were able to mount the camera on, and we rigged up a couple of lights on either side. And then I did actually have like a pegboard and a glass plate below it, which is how you put a plate of glass over the cell and the cell over the background in traditional animation. I did very little traditional animation after all that. I would do the weirdest things under that camera. I would animate wet paint, which turned out to be something that the great Oscar Fissinger had done like 20, 25 years earlier in his experimental films, but I had never seen them. I would animate anything I could throw under there. I would put little toys there and make them move around. I would animate cotton. I would rip up cotton balls and like animate cotton like it was like clouds. I put peanut shells under maybe it was actual peanuts under the platen, which has a layer of foam rubber underneath it, so that it doesn't just go clunk on the cell background setup. And by pushing down on the platen, the peanuts would open up slightly, like they were talking. And this was all shot one frame at a time, click, click. And I did line drawing animation, and I did a little bit of cell animation, which, really one kid trying to paint backgrounds, do the pencil animation on paper, and then trace it all onto cells, and then flip the cells over and consistently color, because again, 24 frames per second, 24 cells to get a second of film, although, there's all sorts of ways you cheat around that. But for one kid to do all that was, I would have had to drop out of school, and I'd still be working on it today. So that was not really, totally feasible, but I did enough of it to sort of understand the process. And again, this to me was just all came out of painting with poster paints, for school, and, doing the thing of making the turkey with your handprint, that we all did at Thanksgiving in kindergarten. And, what I had that the average kid wouldn't have had, there were three things. One, I had access to some equipment, which was nice and essential. So that's number one. Number two, I somehow instinctively understood how animation worked and pretty much understood the technical aspect of it without getting too granular. I didn't understand about exposure sheets and timing of shots and stuff. But for a 7 or 8 year old, I understood a lot.
Well,
and three, I had the focus and concentration I spent all weekend, every weekend, doing this stuff, which most kids just aren't, focused enough to do.
Well, that's what I was going to say. At 8 years old, most kids don't have the patience for it at all.
Right, but to me it was fun. And,
exactly.
Therein lies the trick. It needs to be. If it isn't fun, you don't do it.
Yeah.
Especially not at 8. And for kids, painting is fun. Slopping paint around on a piece of poster board is fun. And it was fun. And then, we edited. My father edited it together. And I did many other things other than just shooting in front of a camera. I did scratch-on film animation, where I would take black film stock in a metal scribe and just literally scratch on the film to make various motions. And
right.
Sometimes do frame-at-a-time stuff, and sometimes do lines that were just shooting all over the place and stuff like that. And that was taught to me by Len Lai, who was an artist who also made a film called Free Radicals that's pretty well known among connoisseurs of artistic films. It's probably on YouTube somewhere where you can see it, but he was an artist, but he also, I just read a biography of him last year, and it was like, oh my God, I can't believe I knew this guy, right up till his death, and I didn't know all this stuff about him. He worked with Hitchcock, he knew Dylan Thomas, he was amazing. Anyway, he taught me the scratch on film technique. So there were a lot of, and I would paint directly on clear film, all sorts of things, in this one little 12-minute film. It was just a series of experiments that I then recorded a soundtrack where I banged on my mom's pots and pans with egg beaters and various things, making weird noises and singing and playing records. And we had this soundtrack, and Jonas Mekas, who is a very influential
independent filmmaker,
experimental filmmaker,
yeah.
Yes, saw it and proclaimed me the Mozart of cinema, which my reaction at age 8 was, who's Mozart? I knew who Orson Welles was, but I did not know who Mozart was.
So Short Circuit did not have a through line or a story to it then.
No, nothing, no story. It was just a bunch of anime. It was like a little festival of animation with all sorts of different experiments of different techniques of animation. And what it was really like, I've always described it like this. It's like popping open the top of the head of a 7-year-old boy and looking directly inside to see what's rattling around in there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's cars and explosions and people running around and weird stuff happening and a lot of Looney Tunes and Warner Brothers cars. You know, it's like looking directly into a child's head.
Right.
And that was its charm. Now, how that gets to be a through line to then becoming a writer was that I kept experimenting, and I ultimately, around the time I was 13 or 14, my experiments, it just exceeded my ability to do by myself. I worked as a gopher for an animation house in New York so that I could get evening and weekend access to their huge professional Oxbury camera to try a bunch of experiments that involved multipass and whatnot. And I actually produced, and in like 2 or 3 months of work on that, I produced 8 seconds of film. And at some point I went, first of all, the 8 seconds isn't all that great. It didn't quite turn out the way I was expecting it to. But second, this is going to take 7 years. By then I knew exposure sheets, and I had an exposure sheet for the whole film, and I had done, like 1/60th of it.
What age were you?
Too complicated.
What age were you at this point?
I think I was 13 or 14
Wow.
when that happened. And I just went, I like doing this, but I'm going to not be able to do it all myself. So I just sort of, I did I made a live action film with a group of friends that sort of has a story. It was very experimental, but it was 60 millimeter, black and white, sync sound. We actually shot it, like a third of it was shot in my room on the 4th floor of our brownstone in Greenwich Village, where my friends and I lugged, an Elmax spider dolly, which weighs about 300 pounds, up 4 flights of stairs, and all sorts of baby brute arcs and lighting equipment and whatnot. And literally, I was doing dolly shots in my room, which was, that was interesting. And so, I did that, and I went, this is way too much. I don't like being so dependent on other people, and it's really complicated. And I think in my heart of hearts, I knew I don't know how to tell a story. Now, that was when I was 15, and I sort of went, I'm kind of done with filmmaking. I did one other thing in film, which was I was director of photography of a film that the science fiction writer Samuel R. Delaney made called The Orchid, which was a lot of fun, and it was nice to not be the guy calling the shots, but, and it was fun to do, but it was not something I wanted to do, like, forever. And so I rattled around, and at some point in there, I made the decision, well, I like science fiction. I'm going to become a science fiction writer, by gosh. Because it stemmed out of wanting to do it all myself. And, animators are control freaks. When you're doing animation, you control every pixel of the screen that is projected of the image. You control every square inch of the frame, and animation people tend to therefore be control freaks. And I had enough of that in me that I went, okay, what can I do where I'm completely in control? And I think instinctively I went, writing. And it turned out I kind of had a flair for it. I had a flair. I was really good at writing prose. I could sling words really well, I found.
And
that came out of a lot of, thank you. That came out of a lot of reading. I started when I was about 14 or 15 reading voraciously. I literally decided one day I'm going to read books. I need to read more books. I'm not just the ones for school, because nothing ruins a book like having to read it for school.
But don't
I
you think?
remember I had read Catch-22. This is a couple of years later. on my own, and then I had to reread it for an English class, and it was like, oh, I hate doing this. I thought I liked this book. It's horrible. This is agony, you know. But so I read a lot, and I had a facile way with words. And I think instinctively I still sort of understood I could do incidents, I could do kind of short stories, but I couldn't tell a story. And in fact, when I was 18, the AFI, which was still relatively a new thing at that time, they hadn't produced, you know, any of the famous people they produced, although some of them were attending that year. They offered me a directing fellowship, which I turned down.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I turned it down was I said, I don't want a directing fellowship, but I'll take a writing fellowship. And they went, no, we don't want you as a writer, we want you as a director. And I went, no, I need to learn how to tell stories. And I'm just going to mention that, do you see what I mean? There's a through line between, you know, painting with poster paint when you're a kid, all the way up to I'm going to be a writer.
Yeah.
To me, it's all the same thing all the way through. This is fun. I like doing it. I want to do it. And it, you know, when I got to the point where they offered me the directing fellowship, I was like, no, I can't be a director. First of all, I don't know if I'm really temperamentally suited, although everybody sort of feels like, oh, what I really want to do is direct. But also because I didn't think I was a storyteller yet. And I'm going to now make a giant leap ahead, okay? And
please don't hurt yourself.
Anybody listening, the secret to writing that I was trying to figure out at that time, which is this. In any kind of a story, whether it's a screenplay, a teleplay, a novel, or whatever, everything is character. Henry James famously said landscape is character. And he was right. But
of course he's right.
So is every story is character. Plot is character. Plot twists are character. It all is about character. And
correct.
if it isn't, you're doing something wrong. It's all character. It's all character, and that's what I hadn't figured out at that time. It only took me like 20 years to actually realize it. I think instinctively I learned it, but I never verbalized it until, frankly, recently.
One of the things that we teach on a regular basis is that audiences, people, don't care about places, events, or things. They care about people in conflict with other people, and that is character. Now, you can have a place or an event that has a character to it and is part of the characteristic of your story, but you're not going to tell a story about a room. You're going to tell a story about people in that room.
Right. Everything is an aspect of character, including, in a funny way, the characters. I've always said a hero plus a villain equals a full human being. Really,
that's
all conflicts are about our conflicts with ourselves.
That's interesting.
And if you know, which is why you don't shovel a character who like totally doesn't belong into a story where they don't belong.
It won't work.
I always said about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, they did not have the personalities in the original few issues of the comic that had appeared when I wrote the original 5-episode pilot. It wasn't even a pilot; it was just a miniseries then.
Did you say that? Did you say your adaptation did not have the character that was in the comics?
Yeah, it didn't, because there really wasn't much character in the comics. There were 7 issues of the comic, and there was, you really couldn't tell one turtle from the other. And this was something that I was adamant about when I was originally, dealing with the head of the studio on the project, was these guys need to be 4 distinct characters.
Sure.
If you have 2 funny guys, or, 2 sarcastic guys and 2 guys who are nerdy, science guys, you've got, 2 redundant characters. They have to each one be different.
Right.
And, there was not much attempt to do that, because they weren't really interested, especially in the earliest comics, in doing that. I mean, it was basically a parody of Ronin and X-Men, and I mean, it was very specifically a parody of Ronin. Even the comic logo, that kind of block square Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that they use to this day, is a parody of Frank Miller's, typography for the title of Ronin on the cover of, inside that comic series that he did.
Right.
So they weren't really interested in that, and the sort of, people say I didn't really see it, but I guess it was there that, like, well, Raphael, who in my version was kind of he was the guy who made the wisecracks. He was very sarcastic. He made the most, like, direct jokes. Was like, had anger. He was quick to anger in the original comic, which was consistent with what I did. I was like, well, first of all, I didn't really see that, but second, that's not really a character. That's not archetypically or in any other way really a character.
Right.
So what I did was, and the thing is, all the characters have to be somewhat different, but they have to feel like a cohesive whole. So what I came up with, since there were four of them, I kind of, looked to quartets like the Beatles and the four Marx Brothers.
Interesting.
As kind of having the, but it was a little. I mean, that wasn't totally deliberate. It was more like, okay, this confirms that I'm in the right direction. I mean, it just seemed like you had to have a leader type who was the straight arrow and the real martial arts guy, and then you needed. I knew I was going to add a lot more science fiction than was in the original comic, because for a kids animated series, we needed robots because there was going to be a lot of fighting, and you can't have a lot of, organism to organism fighting. If you have a bunch of robot henchmen and whatnot, you can just destroy them, with impunity, because you're just smashing a machine. You're not hurting, a living being. So I thought, okay, we're going to need a science guy, the tech guy, and he's going to be kind of nerdy and, have a little bit of, say, Woody Allen to him. And then then I want, the character I felt closest to, who was kind of the Groucho character or the John Lennon character, if you're going with the Beatles, who was the one who's always making the sarcastic wisecracks, because, you cannot do this show not funny. Now, the original comic to me was completely not funny.
Huh.
Maybe it was funny if you were a hardcore comic book nerd and got basically the references they were making. But to me, it wasn't funny. And how can you do a show called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles without comedy in it? And also, it's a kid's show. It needs to be lighter and whatnot. So a character who basically, knows he's in a cartoon show, and knows that all of this is just, who can say, isn't this weird, and make jokes about it, seemed like a must. And then I thought, we need the character, it's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Now, in the comic, none of them really acted remotely like teenagers. And I said, we need the character who embodies, the spirit of this team, the teenager is the essence of it.
Yeah.
Kind of in the way that Sid Vicious embodied the essence of the Sex Pistols, in that, the essence of punk, in that he couldn't play his instrument, he couldn't sing, he was a complete screw-up in every aspect of his life, and yet somehow or other he was, the model of what the entire movement was about.
Right.
And I said, that character, should basically be Spicoli from Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I mean, that was kind of, and also surfers that I knew because I live in L.A. and, people who are, dude people. And the surfing aspect...
Is that where Cowabunga Dude came from?
Yeah, in the first episode, because in my version of the Turtles, maybe in other writers' scripts of the original series, but in any script that I wrote or story edited, Michelangelo is the only character who says, well, sometimes they yell it all at once, but he's the only character who individually ever uses the term. It's his term because he's kind of a surfer dude. And, there was some controversy of where, and he says it in the first episode. He doesn't say dude, but he says Cowabunga.
Got it.
And there was some controversy. Oh, well, they got that from the guy on the old Howdy Doody show. I think it was Chief Thunderthud was his name, who would come in and say, well, Cowabunga, Buffalo Bob.
Really?
Yeah. But the thing is that I was 6 when Howdy Doody went off the air, and I actually wasn't allowed to watch it for some reason. So I only ever saw the final episode of Howdy Doody, the last one they aired. I never had seen Howdy Doody. I got it from Peanuts because there was in like 65 when the big surfing craze hit, or 64, a strip that involved Snoopy running with a board, holding his stick over his head, wearing his, flowery jams, those kind of baggy swim trunks that surfers wore then, running toward the punchline. The fourth panel was him running toward the water with a thought balloon, which would be a yell, in huge letters, "Cowabunga," as he heads toward the water with his surfboard. And that had always stuck. I mean, virtually every Peanuts strip ever done stuck in my mind. I was a huge fan of Peanuts as a kid and still am. But I remembered that when I had this scene where they're trying to escape a building that's flooding up at them, like a skyscraper, one story at a time. And I had Michelangelo grab a toppled file cabinet, jump on it like a surfboard, and surf into the fire escape heading upward, yelling "Cowabunga."
Mm.
And we all went, that might be a catchphrase, especially after it got recorded. So, I put it in, I think it's in every episode of the first 5 shows. It's certainly in just about every episode afterwards. But so here you have, I'm getting back to what I'm saying of everything is character. What I did to create the Turtles, the way I put it is, not to create the Turtles, but to create the Turtles' characterizations in the cartoon show, was to take my own personality, who I am, who I wish I was, who I'm afraid I am, and kind of my dark crabby side, and broke them into 4 pieces and gave 1 piece to each of the turtles. So those 4 turtles, like brothers, form one total personality. The team is the personality.
So you are the turtles.
Is a functional character in addition to the individual members of the team. I don't run around with nunchucks and katanas,
No.
fighting the Foot Clan. But no, I put my personality into them. I wanted them to, I wanted to be expressing myself every time I wrote them, and it wasn't totally conscious, but. In fact, as with much of my process, it was completely unconscious, and then I looked back and went, "Oh, look what I did!" Like when I was rereading the script.
But I've just learned something
but
about
when I was
you.
writing it, I just did it instinctively because you write from who you are.
Right. Well,
of course, it's going to be me.
I just learned something about you that I did not know: is that you are the turtles and the turtles are you.
Like King Arthur, the land and I are one. I am not. I wish I could say I created the turtles. But it's
the
those
personas.
Turtles, is me. It's the only way I could have written them for like 9 continuous years.
Yeah.
I mean, literally 9 years out of my life was spent, writing those guys, and I never got tired of it because it was just, me.
That's
and
very
as long as
interesting.
we're on the Turtles, I'll say the other thing about the show, which I was, like from literally the first episode, very adamant about, although. Because there was a co-story editor, this only holds true mostly for my shows, and even I had to get away from it from time to time, so either under orders or whatever. But what I wanted to do with the show was to have it be a real action-adventure show with straight, a superhero show with superhero plot lines and superhero stories with consequences that you actually cared about. And then just let the turtles make it funny. Because I am, and obviously there's exceptions to everything, but I am very strongly of the belief that you do not play comedy on top of comedy. In other words, you don't do the funny villain with the goofy plan that can't possibly work, and his sidekicks are clowns, and and then, and the funny turtles are going to come in and stop. It's just, it doesn't work.
No, it's a straight story with comedy.
Comedy plays best on top of drama.
Yeah.
Because comedy is drama, looked at from 2 inches to the side, basically.
That's right.
If it happens to you, if it happens to me, it's tragedy. If it happens to you, it's comedy.
It's always best when it's a straight story told with comedic stuff in it.
Right, and that would be the same about playing comedy as well.
Absolutely.
When Howard Hawks made Bringing Up Baby with Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant, she had never really done she certainly had never done a screwball comedy before, or since. And apparently, I mean, she came in and was just playing for laughs constantly, and he had to get her to settle down and say, you have to take your character seriously. This stuff is not funny to your character. This stuff is all serious to your character, and you need to play it that way and let the audience find it funny.
Absolutely right.
That she would make such stuff serious. So, yeah, I mean, that's the first rule of comedy is if you play it for laughs, they will see you coming a mile down the street, and they will cross their arms, they'll fold their arms in front of their chests, and won't laugh.
So let me ask you, when you first started developing the series, did you have even the vaguest inkling that it would turn into the worldwide phenomenon that it became?
Yes.
You did? You really knew?
I said to the line producer of the original 5-parter, I said, this is either going to be the biggest bomb or the biggest success in the history of children's television.
Wow. And
I don't know which. But I thought it had the possibility just because, honestly, just going on the name, the fact that somebody had the guts to I get it if you're, Eastman and Laird and you're, just self-publishing your comic, you can call it whatever you want. But to invest the level of money that the various companies put into just getting the 5-parter up and running, and we knew there was a toy company behind it, and they had a line of toys they were going to be doing and whatnot. I mean, that took some guts, and it's just you can't forget the name. The name is so odd that and weird that it sticks with you. So I thought there's a possibility this might work. What I was surprised by was the level and depth to which the kids took to it.
Mm-hmm.
And, honestly, I think a lot of that came from what I was talking about right at the start of this, which is, doing that, there's a straight line that goes through my whole life back to, painting with poster paints when I was a kid. And not losing that quality. I kind of know what kids like, and I'm kind of on their level. My wife says, David never talks down to kids. He talks to them like they're little grown-ups, which is sort of half true. I talk to them like they're grown-ups, and I talk to them from the kid inside that still lives inside of me. Of
course. One of the things that I prided myself on in all the animation that I wrote, I never once thought that I was ever, patronizing, demeaning, talking down to kids ever.
Right. Oh, absolutely. That's why I hated anything, with pro-social values, which was a big, buzz phrase after Peggy Charon and Action for Children's Television started, where and especially on He-Man, a show I wrote it for. I wrote it for it. I did. I had Jello today.
What a good writer you are.
I am writing of goodly. I wrote for and hated every second of it. I mean, I have had so many people wanting to interview me, about my work on He-Man, and I've given a couple, but basically, I tell them I don't remember anything. I have blocked it. There was nothing memorable happened. I just remember disliking it intensely, and I think one of the reasons I disliked it was because there was a furor over this show before they had a script one written, just when they announced they were going to do it. Oh, it's going to be so violent. Look at him. He's like Conan the Barbarian. He's going to be slashing people with that sword and He-Man, that name, and all this kind of stuff. So every episode had to literally end with, today Adam learned an important lesson about, bloody, bloody, bloody. So, and kids can smell that being talked down to by an adult, from a mile off.
Oh,
a hound can, sent out a pheasant, over, from 3 hills over.
Did you feel that way with My Little Pony?
No, My Little Pony had no pro-social stuff in it at all. No, in fact, I wrote a My Little Pony that I was almost appalled at when I actually saw it, because in My Little Pony you would write, you wouldn't write the songs. Every episode had a song.
Right.
But what you would do is you would write in the script, okay, at this point they break into a song about it, and you would say what the song
was supposed to be about.
Yeah,
of course.
in a general sense. And I wrote an episode because I was ordered to write like the first tooth ponies, or they had like little kid ponies, and then they had baby newborn ponies, they were called. And they said, we want you to do a story with the newborn ponies and the first tooth ponies, who obviously are more, like toddlers. And so I thought, okay, let's touch on, maybe a starting point for this is that all of the toddler ponies are upset and jealous because the newborn ponies are getting all the attention, in the way that young kids are jealous of, their newborn baby's brother or sister. And this somehow triggers, them doing something that leads to a calamity, and then all the regular cast of ponies, have to sort it out. And so I instructed them to put in a song where basically the first tooth ponies sing about how jealous they are of the baby ponies, the newborn ponies, and all the terrible things they wish would happen to them. And when the show aired with the song, I mean, they had these baby ponies dangling in chains over flaming pits, and I wish they'd get eaten by monsters. And I was like, I might have gone a little far with this one. I'm not sure. I don't think I would have quite taken it this far, but Hasbro had very few restraints. I mean, if anything, with doing any show for Hasbro, and I worked on G.I. Joe, although I never wrote for it, I was like a kind of weird intermediate story editor who kind of fixed all their problems and then just left the show, because it was almost a chain of command problem, because the shows were produced by Marvel, but the scripts were generated by Sunbow, and somebody needed to kind of be a go-between between the two factions.
Mm-hmm.
Or Transformers, or My Little Pony. There were actually instances where I said, no, we are not going to do that. This is a kids show. Which I very rarely do, and I'm the guy who wrote arguably the most violent episode of Transformers, which is the Optimus Prime origin story, which is where the character that I created, Orion Pax, who is basically going to get rebuilt into Optimus Prime in this flashback. It's actually a time travel flashback. Gets killed by Megatron. I mean, the first thing Megatron does bad in the histories of, Cybertron and the Transformers universe is to kill Orion Pax, soon to be reborn as Optimus Prime. And in the script, I mean, he blows his arm off and then picks it up off the ground and swings it at his head and decapitates him with his own arm. I mean, it was just like, they filmed enough of it. They didn't quite go that far. But I mean, there was like stuff on Transformers. I did a show that involved a little demon creature who lived on energy. He actually was made of energy. In my mind, he was Reddy Kilowatt. You remember that character from the old, like, electric company commercials, power company commercials?
Sorta.
Reddy Kilowatt, or he was like General Electric, or their mascot, or something like that. He's made of little lightning bolts, basically, and that was my idea. And the story editor was like, let's do a scene where he, rips a bunch of wires out of the wall and then bites into them and sucks the power out of them. And I'm going, no. This is an imitatable act. This is for kids. You are not going, the writer, who is usually the irresponsible one, I had to actually say, no, we're going to be responsible about this and not do that. I don't want to hear about kids electrocuting themselves because they managed to get the plate off of a wall socket and stick their mouth in there. So no, there was no pro-social stuff in it was earlier than that, and it tended to be network stuff. Now one of the greatest quotes I ever heard and I'm quoting it third hand, on My Little Pony, was that Sunbow, did all those Hasbro shows, Transformers, etc. Sunbow was basically Hasbro's advertising agency. It was the production arm of Hasbro's advertising agency.
Right.
So the woman at Sunbow who was supervising My Little Pony had been familiar with doing ads for My Little Pony, and that's it. And she'd never been involved in episodic television before. And she kept asking, according to a friend of mine who was one of the story editors on the show, why do these stories have to have conflict in them? Why can't it just be 12 minutes, the ponies running around, accomplishing things and doing nice stuff and romping through hills? And, and it was like, do I buy you a copy of Aristotle's Poetics?
Yes.
How do I explain this to you?
We kind of need that conflict. I'm curious. I want to get a little bit out of the animation world for a moment with you and talk about your live action stuff. You started off really doing live action, obviously, not once you got into Hollywood. And I know you
actually
did
no. I started
Trek.
with animation. Star Trek was animation.
But I'm saying then you moved pretty rapidly into doing Wonder Woman and Buck Rogers and so on. What would you say the principal differences are between writing animation and live action, if any?
You can do a whole lot less in live action on terms of, well, it used to be in those days. Now it's sort of different, but since most special effects now are in essence animation, even though it's computer animation, but you had less of a budget. You just you could sort of show a character. Like the first live action show I wrote for was The Secrets of Isis.
Mm-hmm.
Which was a kid's show that was basically a ripoff of Wonder Woman, and that led to me writing for Wonder Woman because I basically went to them and said, "Look, I wrote for Isis. That's just a ripoff of what you're doing. Why don't you let me, take a shot at your show?" And they went, "Oh, okay." The scale is obviously smaller. But I would, just from literally a craft technical standpoint in animation, and this has sort of changed lately in TV animation where a lot of shows are written in storyboard, but back in the days when they were written as scripts, which some still are, obviously, in an animation script, you actually kind of direct in the script. You break things down into shots. They don't always follow it, but you do in a live action script, you write, interior living room, characters enter, and then you write dialogue. And you never change the shot until you change the scene, unless you need a close-up for a plot point,
right.
Like, close up the wine glass, Phyllis dips some poison from her ring into, the contents of the goblet.
Sure.
But you never break it into shots. You don't describe action a lot, again, unless it's just plot-oriented, whereas you do much more of that in animation, and thus the rule that, a live-action script is a page per minute, and an animation script is more like 2 pages a minute. And again, my background of, in animation, which came from just an instinctive understanding of how the medium worked, was one of the reasons why I got hired so much, because everybody generally said, the thing about the story editors all said, a David Wise script, the story will be tight and it will hold together and you won't have to fix a lot of stuff. And the production people said, you can literally throw his scripts right into board. You can just board from the scripts, just board what he writes, storyboard
nice.
it.
That's good.
So that is one of the reasons why I've had such a long career and why I've also written so much, like 4 individual shows. 15 Transformers, 100 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, probably 15 of, several other shows like Defenders of the Earth, half dozen My Little Ponies,
do you have,
et cetera, et cetera.
Do you have a
and also
favorite
the fact
show?
that I'm greedy and I never turn down work. Do I have a favorite show?
Yeah, is it Turtles?
Turtles is certainly the one closest to my heart.
Mm-hmm.
On terms of finished product, my personal favorite is a show that nobody ever saw because it barely aired in this country because of preemption on CBS, called Cadillacs and Dinosaurs.
Ah, yes.
Now, I only did the last 6 episodes. I was actually taking over from, like, Stephen D'Souza, who wrote Die Hard, and, a bunch of people who worked on the show.
Right.
I did the last 6 episodes, and I thought they were really good. For some reason, they're just the ones, and part of it was the animation was actually good, which the animation is almost never good on anything I write. I'm usually brought in at the last minute when the show is behind budget. Not behind, but behind schedule, because I'm really fast and to solve problems and whatnot. So I always get kind of the dog end of the animation. But Cadillacs and Dinosaurs was really super well animated and just looked good and played well, and I was really happy with the results. And if you want to see it, I think the episodes, although you have to pay like $1 an episode or something, are on like Amazon Video. It was never really got a home video release. And that was another one based on a comic book. That's a comic book by Schultz. I forget his first name.
Not Charles.
No, hell no. No, he was the opposite. He kind of draws like Wally Wood. And whereas Charles Schultz is like, basically 3 lines and you're done.
Right.
He's a total minimalist.
So tell us about working on Pet Robots with Scott Christian Sava, who's been a guest on this show, and your wife.
Wait, Scott is not my wife. I was going, wait, something landed wrong.
Let's
love
clarify
Scott,
that.
I don't. Let's be reasonable. My wife Audrey Taylor and I are writing Pet Robots.
Okay.
For Scott, it's we love Scott. We have known he was part of the poker game that you were also in.
Yes.
He's just a fantastic human being and very creative and very stubborn. And he basically called us up one day and said, I'm tired of working with all these, he'd been working with a well-known Hollywood writer, and he was like, I tell him what I want, and he just goes and writes something else. And I'm like, dude, just, we'll take dictation to work with you because it'll be fun. And, he had this idea. I mean, he was already deep in production on Animal Crackers, which is, I think it has a release date, but I don't know if it's a firm release date yet. But the distributor is looking at the spring of 2018 to bring it out. And his voice cast is...
It's unbelievable. I've seen it.
Voice guy is Jamie Thomason, who I worked with on Mighty Ducks for
right.
Disney. He's got Emily Blunt, John Krasinski, Sirian McKellen, Sylvester Stallone, Danny DeVito, Gilbert Gottfried. I mean, it's just insane.
Yeah.
The talent in this, and it's a really good film. I have seen it.
I've seen it too. It's really good.
Yeah, it's really something. I mean, considering he basically did it out of his basement, practically. It's remarkable. So he's got several other projects that he's lining up financing for, and the first one is Pet Robots. It's a really fun idea. It's not something I have done before on terms of, I've never done an animated feature. I have written features, but not animated ones. And I get to work with my wife, which is a lot of fun. I get to work with Scott, which is a lot of fun. It can be a little maddening. Scott, it just bubbles over with ideas. And sometimes it's a strain just to get him to just like, latch onto one and let's just go with that today.
Yeah, I understand.
Let's not rewrite. I mean, sometimes you're rewriting stuff that you wrote that morning because he's had a better idea.
Yeah, that's right.
And we just like working with him. And, I've been working in the industry for 40 years, something like that.
Yeah.
Over 40 years now. And I've had very good working experiences and very horrible working experiences, and I'm at the point where I only want to work with people I want to work with now.
Sure.
I have, some other stuff lined up with guys I worked with at Disney who are very dear friends. I will almost only work with a dear friend, or if I meet you and we have chemistry, or I really love the project.
Right.
So writing for Scott has been fun. It's a lot of drafts, which I'm not used to because, again, coming out of television, and again, being the guy who's brought in on the show that's behind schedule, so there's no time.
Right.
Which I always liked because that gives the higher-ups less time to screw with your scripts. They're like, well, we just got to record this thing. We can't make any changes. Boom. Because the whole production train will fall apart if we don't. I'm used to, one and you're done. I make very few. I've trained myself to write scripts as near final as possible.
Right. But not in a feature. You got to keep going.
Yeah, I know. It's the drafting process is kind of a process of digging.
Yeah.
Till you find the goal.
That's right.
It's almost like sculpting, like chipping away until you find the shape in the sculpture.
Well,
and that's new for me, and it's actually a little exhausting for me because I'm just not used to it because I pour so much, concentration and effort into my drafting, and I'm having to learn to be looser and to just let it go. And I think this kind of sucks, but maybe it'll lead to something, which is just goes against every instinct I've developed over the past 40 years. So you've
learned out how to lay back a little bit instead of jamming forward, not knowing. Yeah.
Exactly.
So
it's like, it doesn't matter. Just let it go.
Yeah. Well, I for one
like Frozen.
I for one am let it go from Frozen is right. I for one am truly looking forward to seeing whatever you guys do, and hopefully you get that all together and he's able to raise the financing for it and get it made, and perhaps Animal Crackers will come out and be a giant hit, and that'll help to grease that wheel. I would love to see that. And just so you know, we've been going here for quite some time, and we're actually coming toward the end of the show. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. You've obviously worked with and met lots of people in the entertainment industry, and I'm wondering if you have an oddball or a quirky or a weird or funny story that you could share.
Oh, I had this so nailed, and now I've forgotten which one I was going to share with you. The thing is, I don't actually work with a lot of people. What I loved about being a writer is that I just live in my little office in the back of my house, and I don't actually have to deal with people. But I will tell you, just an only in L.A. sort of thing that happened to me long ago. This was in 1977. I had just written the first episode I wrote of Wonder Woman. I wrote a second episode which didn't get shot. But we were having company that evening, and I needed to go to the Pottery Barn in our local mall, which was the Sherman Oaks Galleria, to get a few things for that evening. So around 10 in the morning, I rolled out, went over to the Galleria, and I'm walking, down the main promenade of the mall, which was an open-air mall then. And I'm heading toward the Pottery Barn. I'm going, wow, there's something going on in front of the Pottery Barn. What the heck? And I get a little closer, and I realize, oh, my God, they're shooting a movie or something in front of the Pottery Barn. Oh, great. How the heck am I going to get inside? And then I get closer, and I realize they're shooting an episode of Wonder Woman. And I get a little closer, and I see Ted Shackelford and Joan Van Ark, who were the guest stars in my episode. And I realized and Ted is wearing, because they both come from the future, and Ted is wearing, a spangly silver future suit. And I realized they're shooting my episode of Wonder. I can't get into Pottery Barn because they are shooting my episode of Wonder Woman. So I hung around, and I was 20. I just turned 22 at the time. And I was hanging around in front of the Pottery Barn, telling anybody on the crew who would listen, I wrote this episode. Sure. They were like, yeah, right, kid.
Sure.
Get out of our hair. So that's my oddball story.
Well, that's good. I mean,
it's my brush with fame. That was it. Pretty much all downhill from there.
At 22, that's all by itself highly unusual. Not too many 22-year-olds sell anything. You had already sold at least something at 19, but at 22 to sell live action, that's very unusual.
Oh man, I was a film student at University of California, San Diego, and I said I'm dropping out, and my professors were like, "Why are you dropping out?" I said, "Because I just won an Emmy."
Well, and take that.
Right.
Okay, and so can you leave us with one good, solid piece of advice or a tip that those who are trying to make their bones in the business or trying to figure out a way to get better at it could help them in some way?
I wish I had asked you this the other day when we were talking, but do you mean generally or as applies to writing?
Any which way you can say it. Any piece of advice. If you have something for writers,
well, I'm going to give a specific writing piece of advice, but I'll start with a very general piece of advice. If you want to do anything in the creative arts, you need a prerequisite is you have to do it. And by that I mean not just doing gets it done, which is true. Woody Allen once said, 80 or 90% of success is showing up. Okay, but not only do you have to do it, but you have to need to do it like you need oxygen. You can't not be doing it. You have to need it that badly because you're going to face a lot of obstacles, a lot of competition, a lot of abuse, and a lot of rejection. And at the end of the day, you have to be doing the thing you love to make all that worth it.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to do it like breathing.
Absolutely.
So that's my general one. Specifically for writers of scripts. Okay, remember I said everything is character and story? Story is really character. Like if you did a Hardy Boys story, that if you did a gritty, you killed my daughter, I'm going to take my revenge on you, Liam Neeson story, as a Hardy Boys story, it wouldn't work.
Right.
Story is character.
Right.
Okay, so dialogue in scripts is story, and story is character. We always think dialogue is character, but dialogue is really story. Dialogue is drama, and this is the thing I say to, because the one, somebody's probably said this before, and I'm probably not on your podcast, and I'm probably not saying anything original, but the one, like, kind of amateur night in Dixie mistake that a lot of script writers make is tons of dialogue. Here is my rule. Dialogue is a luxury. You can't afford it. Write as little dialogue as possible and make your dialogue to the point and to the establishment of your character and in character as possible with as few words.
Nobody has said that before, and that is very, very valuable advice. Because after all, we are making movies. They should move, and they should be active and visual, and just talking.
And if you're worried that you're getting too talky, sit down and read your dialogue out loud and time how long it takes you to read it, and suddenly realize that scene that in your head feels like 12 seconds is 4 minutes.
Yeah.
And something's got to be cut.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that's incredibly wise advice, because we always talk about here at school, we always talk about trimming the fat, getting it down to the tightest possible, getting rid of anything that doesn't move the story forward or expand our understanding of character. If it doesn't do one of those two things, preferably both at the same time, but if it doesn't do either of those things, get rid of it. All those things, and so what you're saying is extremely valuable. So I thank you for saying
one
it.
piece of bonus advice
on
the trimming the fat that you just said. When you're really down to it and really desperate, cut all the adjectives.
Interesting.
That's what I do.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's very, 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 very good, David.
Thank you. I thought it was perspicacious.
Perspicacious.
Yeah, I'm full of perspicacity today. A shower will clear that. It'll take care of that.
Well, we've been talking for the last hour to David Wise, one of the greatest writers to come out of Cleveland and New York and wherever else.
Well, now, there actually are some heavyweights who came out of Cleveland.
That's
mostly
true.
Garfield Heights.
Rod Serling.
I was Shaker Heights. So sorry, what?
Rod Serling came out of Cleveland.
Yeah, he's almost in my league.
He's almost in your league,
yeah, exactly.
So anyway, it's been a great thrill to have you on StoryBeat today, and I'm so happy we had this chance to talk for this period, a little more than an hour, and I thank you for coming on.
Oh, you are most welcome. Nice sharing your company. It's been too long.
It has. Thank you. Thanks, David. Have a great day. Today's StoryBeat tip: the secret formula for writing success is this: but liberally applied to chair. That's it. That's all you need to know. That is the only way I know of to become successful. Sit yourself down and write, and write some more. And while you're doing that, write us some mind-boggling, gut-wrenching, heart-rending, soul-building, tear-us-apart killer movies and TV shows. There will never be enough of those in the world. And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. If you liked this episode, please take a moment to give us a rating or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your feedback helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.